What's up, guys? I'm Kate with TypeMatch, and today I am making a video about what FE looks like in reality. So FE stands for extroverted feeling and is one of the 8 cognitive functions that make up the 16 personality types. Now, every personality type has all 8 cognitive functions. It just depends on where they are in your cognitive stack, dictates how you are using and prioritizing that function, what role it plays in your mind. But the primary users of FE are the TP types and the FJ types. And these are the ones that use FE and TI in conjunction with each other within their top 4 functions. So they are prioritizing this way of judging information that they take in. Now, it's really hard to talk about in an individual cognitive function because it's always, they never work in isolation. They don't exist in a vacuum. They work in conjunction with all of your other functions, and especially with FE, working in conjunction with TI, introverted thinking, your own internal logic system. It's difficult to separate the two, but I'll do my best for the sake of this video. So getting into it, FE prioritizes group harmony and social norms over individual feelings and values. So I'll go through each of the FE users. First, we have FE hero or FE dominant. Those are ESFJ and ENFJ. And I find that these types are the most socially oriented of all the types. They are the most likely to describe themselves as extroverted or social, and they often enjoy a role of social organizer, and they really prioritize the harmony of a group. I had an ESFJ recently telling me about why he and his girlfriend broke up, and a lot of his stories with that centered around her breaking with the social harmony of the group. Like, they all went out as a group. They had invited these people to go out for New Year's to a restaurant, and she was tired. She didn't want to do it anymore. So she was sitting outside of the restaurant, and he's like, "What are you doing? All these people are here. All our friends are here. This is time for us to break bread. You're making things awkward." And he ultimately just he let her sit on the curb by herself because group over individual. So I've heard a lot that FE feeds off of FI values, but if those FI values or FI feelings are conflicting with the overall group, that person is out. FE can be rather brutal in cutting out people that are not vibing with the group. And so we often see high FE users, quite surprisingly, in HR roles where they have to be in charge of firing people and figuring out who isn't working right in this organization, who is disrupting the flow. Oopsie. And I'm sorry, this is squeaky, of the organization. So I've also noticed with FE hero, especially with ESFJs, I have a bit more experience with them, is that a lot of their stories will center around how they have helped others, because it's like, oh, I did this thing, I helped this person because they needed me and I felt wanted, is the ultimate moral of the story. And so that's a pattern. And with FE parents functions, the second one, and that's INFJ and ISFJ. With them, I talked about FE having not too hard of a time with cutting people out when it's the last straw. INFJs are famous for this because the parent function is pretty brutal in its and its judgments. So the parent function can often feel like your burden, your cross to bear, your thing that you have to address, even though your child function just wants to have fun and play. Your parent function's like, no, but this. And for INFJs with FE working in conjunction with NI, they're really focused on um, the future, their future harmony. So if you are in a position where you are going to be disrupting that future harmony, you're out of there, because that's their primary orientation. They need that, and they need to create that for themselves and in their lives. With ISFJs, you know, I think that ISFJs don't get painted correctly, or a lot of censors don't in the community. Um, but I've seen that they are quite willing to stand up for their beliefs and what they think is right, because it's a parent function, it's a punchy function, and they can't stand for selfishness at all. FE parents can also have a really hard time putting themselves first, which I will discuss in greater detail later in the video. With FE child, okay, that's ESTPs and ENTPs have this function. The child function really is only working in the moment. So ENTPs and ESTPs can seem very empathetic, and they love to create an atmosphere where the other person feels comfortable and to open up to them. Like, you can tell them anything and you're not going to be judged, which, of course, they got FI trickster. They're not going to judge you morally for what you're telling them. So they really like to create that feeling of openness for you. They want to make you feel good. They like to give you an honest, heartfelt compliment. One that's like, if they think highly of you, they want you to know it. With FE, love giving a good compliment. Can be rather flirty. Like these types like to be funny and charming. They want to be liked, and that's the child, the innocent manifestation of this function. But they're really, because the child function is really just working in the moment, they are really just empathetic in the moment with people that they know, people that are in front of them, expressing a feeling, a value, a need. But if it's like some group, something out there, like you're telling them about a person that they don't know that's having a hard time, they're going to have a really hard time with being sympathetic to that scenario, because it's just not there for them. We're talking about like how people might feel in the future. It's like, ugh, you're not feeling that way right now. Like, we'll just deal with those feelings when they come up. Well, okay, FE child. And then FE inferior, that's INTP and ISTP. This function can be reluctant to engage emotionally with people, because they don't want people to become dependent on them emotionally. That is very stressful. The idea of somebody being dependent on them for their happiness, or that they could make this other person sad, that they're in control of your emotional well-being. That's absolutely not, that's absolutely a major stressor for them. But in that same light, they are susceptible to being people pleasers, because they are so afraid of making other people feel bad that they will often placate them in the moment. So placation is something that I see with FE, not just FE inferior, but lower FE more. because it's like, well, I don't feel strongly about this thing, so I'm just going to tell you what you want to hear to get me out of this interaction a lot of the time because you're making me uncomfortable. I don't want to talk to you. You're annoying. You're boring. So I'm just going to nod my head and agree with you, even though I don't agree with you, because like this isn't important. This doesn't matter to me at all. So, like, yeah, whatever you want. That is FE, like low FE placation. When we think of FE inferior, we can think of Sheldon Cooper, who I think, even if you don't like the Big Bang Theory, like, whatever, you know who he is. Okay. You know what he does. This is something graspable for everybody. He says things like, it's customary to bring a hot beverage when someone is sad, and he's trying very hard to adopt the social norms. The social norms are quite important to him to create order in the social world. Like FE overall understands that we are operating within a society and we need to behave a certain way when we are in a group and operating as a society for us to not all descend into chaos. That is what FE thinks. And I've made some videos on how FE will police other people. Like there's the example I gave on TikTok where I was living in Spain, and you have to adapt to the social and cultural norms of a country when you're living there. That is like what FE will do every time, in order to blend, in order to make my social interactions easier. And there's just a willingness there to try to do that. I want to be part of things. Like, and that's the way that FE will try to like adapt your cultural and social norms, whether it's of a specific store, a town, a country, whatever, like it observes as like, okay, this is what we're all doing here. It's willing to adopt. So Sheldon Cooper has a willingness to do that. And, a lot of people like would describe him sort of like, he seems like a robot that has learned the social norms and whatever has come to life. But that is his FE inferior. Another thing I've noticed with FE inferior is that like, because the inferior function houses our fear, as long as that inferior function is in a fearful state, we will be driven by it. So a lot of FE inferior users are driven by their desire to be valued by others. Like, oh, if I do my saviors, my top functions well enough, then other people will value me and I will finally get to feel good about myself. So they need to get over that fear in order to grow and value what they like for, and value who they are for who they are. Let's see. So I talked about how FE has disdain for any selfishness that it sees and a disdain for what I would call, and I've seen other FE users called, a lack of social awareness, a lack of like, aren't you seeing like that this is what everybody's doing here? This is how things go. This is how we cooperate and behave together. And it can be brutal in cutting out people who disrupt that. FE users can be susceptible, I've seen, to codependency and to caretaking rather than caregiving because, well, if you're prioritizing the feelings of others over your own feelings, then you get to a spot where like in a relationship where, well, as long as my partner feels good, as long as my partner's okay, then I'm okay. And that is like a recipe for disaster in a relationship. It's an extremely unhealthy place to be, and ultimately it's going to frustrate both people in the relationship. So that's something, if you are an FE user, to look out for and make sure you aren't falling into codependent patterns because you're using your FE in an unhealthy way. Let's see. So I talked about, so FE observes cultural and social norms of a given place or group. So because it doesn't matter to them so much, lower FI, they will often, just go along with what the group is doing. So I'm trying to lead up to a controversial example, even though FE generally doesn't like to talk about controversial subjects in public or in a mixed group in front of strangers, because they don't know how the other person feels. So they'll oftentimes preface it, they'll go into it like quite cautiously. I don't want to lead on to how I feel because I don't know how you feel about this thing, quite very cautious with that, not trying to push my beliefs on anybody. But anyway, leading up to the example with masks. Okay, so I'm filming this in June 2021, and it's quite a confusing time regarding masks because it really depends on, like, in the US, the state that you're in, the city you're in, or even the business that you're in. Because where I live, like, it's pretty open, but certain individual businesses will have um, was it signs on the door saying mask required, and then others will not. So what an FE user might do in this scenario, especially low FE users, FE child, FE inferior users, will observe what is the social norm in this particular business to determine whether they are going to use a mask or not, because probably they don't feel strongly about it and they just want to do whatever they have to do to help them blend in socially in this scenario, to help them just like get through this social transaction as quickly as possible. And we'll see this on, there's controversies in the news about people on airplanes refusing to put on masks. And there's other people in the plane where they're just like, dude, just do it. It doesn't even matter. Like, just put it on so we can all go. You are holding up the group from going. But that's also an FE perspective, trying to police others on the social rules and norms in order to facilitate more smooth social interactions. And that doesn't mean that any of these rules or norms that they impose are right, but it's just like in the moment, you know, I've got every child. So I'm like, in the moment, it's like whatever you gotta do to get through people. But it's um anyway, that's not to say that FE users are not independent or rebellious. They are super independent in their thought. So a lot of times it's not how I feel about the thing. It's about like if it makes sense. So does this rule make sense to me? Is it logical TI? If not, I'm not going to follow it. If it is, like, yeah, let's just go ahead with it. Um, so it always has to be backed up with their TI logic of what makes sense to them. And that's why you really can't separate the two functions from each other. But FE users, FETI users are definitely rebellious when things aren't lining up for them logically, and are willing to speak out and to fight the norms in those senses. It's just coming from a different place. Um, yeah, I think that's all I have about FE today. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please give a like and subscribe, and check out the TypeMatch app. It is a friendship and dating app that is based on personality type compatibility.